Did you like the lake house I gave you, Mom? Those were the first words my son said as I set the pumpkin pie on the table that Thanksgiving afternoon. I froze, my hands still gripping the warm ceramic dish. What house? I asked quietly. Across the room, my daughter-in-law stopped moving for a split second, just long enough to confirm what my heart already sensed. Something was terribly wrong. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and let me know the city you're watching from. The room smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey, the kind of scent that once meant comfort to me. I had spent all morning preparing this meal in my tiny kitchen, measuring spices with the same care I used when my husband was still alive. Holidays were always important to him. He believed traditions kept a family close. I held on to that belief long after he passed, even when the house grew quieter, even when my days felt smaller. My son David took a seat at my narrow dining table, his expensive jacket draped carefully over the back of the chair. He looked out of place in my modest home, too polished, too distant, too distracted by a world far removed from mine. It had been months since he'd visited, and I had told myself not to read into that. Jobs get busy. Lives move on. People change. That's what I repeated every time the phone stayed silent. But now, this question, this house I had never received, this look of uncertainty flickering across his face. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath me, and folded my hands in my lap. I tried to replay his words in my mind. Slower this time, clearer. A lake house? Purchased for me? Sent 2 years ago? None of it made sense. My heart thudded painfully, not from fear, but from the sharp tug of confusion. David frowned, as if the puzzle he expected me to solve wasn't aligning. Mom, you did get it? You must have. I handled everything. I searched his face, the same face I used to kiss goodnight, the one that lit up when he brought home school awards, the one I never imagined would look at me with doubt. Honey, I whispered, I would remember receiving a house. From the corner of my eye, I watched Victoria, my daughter-in-law, standing by the counter. She pretended to smooth her sweater, but her hands were too shaky, her eyes too careful. I had seen that look before in people trying to hide something. The shallow breaths, the tightened shoulders, the way she didn't dare make eye contact. A cold thread of realization began weaving itself through my thoughts. For 2 years, I had lived frugally, stretching my paycheck as a school janitor, cutting my medication in half some months, choosing between heating and groceries. Meanwhile, my own son believed he had been supporting me. He believed he had given me a home by the water, something he knew was always a dream of mine. My throat tightened, not from emotion, but from clarity. Someone had intercepted something meant for me. Someone who lived close enough to my son to influence every financial decision he made. Someone who always insisted on checking the mail when they visited. Someone who kept me at arm's length while drawing my son closer. I looked toward Victoria again. She turned her back quickly, pretending to adjust the oven temperature. The oven wasn't even on. My world didn't shatter in that moment. It shifted, just slightly, like a picture frame knocked askew on the wall. But once it tilts, you can't unsee it. And I knew I had to find out what else had been taken from me. The night after Thanksgiving, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small bedroom listening to the old heater click on and off, the sound echoing in the quiet, like a reminder of every winter I had pushed through alone. My mind kept circling back to David's question, replaying it the way you replay a strange noise in the dark to be sure you heard it right. A lake house he believed I owned. Monthly support he believed I received. 2 years of help that never reached me. By morning, the world outside was covered in a thin frost. I wrapped my worn cardigan around my shoulders and made myself a cup of weak coffee. The tile beneath my feet felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just the way my body reacted to the truth slowly rising to the surface. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam drifting from my mug. It felt strange, knowing that something so life-changing had been happening behind my back for so long. Stranger still was realizing I had never questioned any of it. I had accepted the distance. I had accepted the silence. I had accepted that my grown son had his own life now, and that I should be happy simply watching from afar. But now I wondered what I had missed along the way. My mailbox was always suspiciously empty, My daughter-in-law always insisted on helping when it came to paperwork. My son always spoke through her, never directly to me about finances. I remembered the afternoons when Victoria stopped by alone, dropping off pastries she claimed were left over, even though nothing was ever touched. She always lingered near the mailbox, checking it before she rang my doorbell. At the time, I thought she was being polite. Now that memory settled differently in my chest. While sipping my coffee, I reached for the small notebook I kept by the phone. I flipped through pages filled with grocery lists and reminders about medical appointments until I reached the corner where I wrote down every unexpected fee the bank had charged me over the past year. I never understood why those charges appeared. The bank told me they were routine processing adjustments. I accepted that explanation because it was easier to believe in routine than in deceit. I dressed slowly, choosing my thickest sweater and the only pair of winter shoes that still felt comfortable. As I stepped outside, the air hit my face with a sharp chill. The walk to the bus stop was quiet, just the crunch of frozen grass beneath my feet and the distant hum of morning traffic. At the bank, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. I explained I needed to review my account history. The young teller pulled up my information with a polite smile, unaware that each click of her keyboard felt like a countdown. When she slid the printed statements across the counter, the truth was waiting for me in black and white. No monthly support deposits, no property documents for a house I supposedly owned, not a single trace of the financial trail David believed he had built for me. But there was something else. Notes indicating inquiries on my account made 2 years ago. The teller mentioned the name attached. It wasn't mine. It wasn't David's either. I folded the paper slowly, pressing the crease with my thumb. The room around me seemed to fade a little, like I was watching myself from across the space instead of standing in it. On the bus ride home, the statement sat heavy in my purse. Every turn of the road felt like another piece falling into place. My son wasn't the one who failed me. Someone else had interfered long before he ever suspected anything. By the time I reached my street, the frost had melted into thin puddles that reflected the gray winter sky. I paused at the mailbox, letting my hand rest on the cold metal. For years, I had trusted that whatever entered this box was meant for me. Now, all I could see was how easy it would have been for someone else to take what wasn't theirs. As I stepped back into my quiet house, one thought followed me like a shadow. If the lake house wasn't mine, then who had been living off the lie? I didn't turn on the lights when I walked back into the house. The dim gray filtering through the windows felt more fitting for what I carried home. I set my purse on the table and pulled out the bank statements, smoothing the pages with my hands. The numbers stared back at me. Months and months of nothing. Nothing where support should have been. Nothing where the deed transfer should have shown. Nothing but silence in ink form. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the refrigerator hum. It was almost soothing in its honesty. Machines don't lie. People do. By the afternoon, the sky had darkened, and the air outside carried that quiet heaviness winter brings before snow. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck and stepped out again, this time heading toward the small neighborhood grocery store. I didn't need groceries. I just needed to walk, to let my thoughts settle into place without the walls closing in. As I turned onto Maple Street, I saw Mrs. Dalton sweeping her porch. She'd lived across from me for 20 years, long enough to notice things even when she pretended not to. When she spotted me, she lowered her broom and offered a warm smile. "Haven't seen your daughter-in-law around lately," she said, almost casually. I paused. "No, I suppose not." She leaned lightly on the broom handle. "Funny thing, though, for a while she was stopping by your place almost every other day, always checking your mailbox before knocking. I figured she was helping you keep up with things." My breath tightened. Did she ever pick up mail herself? "Oh yes, a few times she walked off with it. Said you asked her to." Mrs. Dalton shrugged. I didn't think much of it. Her broom scraped the porch again, but I barely heard it. A coldness spread through my chest, steady and unmistakable. I thanked her and continued walking, but each step felt heavier. On the way home, I replayed that image, Victoria standing by my mailbox, smiling gently as she claimed to be helping. She always insisted on bringing in my mail when she visited. She always encouraged me not to bother with paperwork, saying she'd explain it all to David later. She always brushed off my questions with a soft pat on the hand, as if I were the fragile one. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table again, the bank papers beside me like quiet witnesses. I thought back to little moments I had dismissed. The new handbag she wore last spring, the weekend trips she said were gifts from her sister, the times David apologized for missing holidays but didn't seem to know why he'd been unavailable. Pieces that never fit suddenly aligned. Someone had rerouted the life my son intended for me. Someone had taken what was supposed to lighten my burdens and used it to build a comfort I never received. The day grew darker. I didn't bother with dinner. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept old letters. Among them was one from my husband, written years before his passing. A simple note, but now the words carried weight I hadn't given them before. Don't ever let anyone manage what belongs to you, sweetheart. Your name matters. My name. Missing from the deed. Missing from the deposits. Missing from the life my son believed he gave me. I traced the edge of the letter with my thumb. Something had been taken. Something had been hidden. And the person who benefited stood right beside my son. The son who trusted her more than he trusted his own mother. I folded the letter, placed it gently back in the drawer, and breathed in the stillness around me. If there was one thing I understood after all these years, it was this. Lies unravel faster when you stop pulling at them, and simply let them fall apart on their own. The next morning, I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in a cold hush. I moved through the kitchen without turning on a single light, feeling my way by memory. The coffee pot sputtered its familiar rhythm while I stood at the counter, letting the quiet settle into my bones. It struck me how different my mornings had become. Years ago, I used to hear my husband humming as he read the newspaper, tapping his foot lightly against the floor. He always rose early, always made sure I had the first cup of coffee. He would kiss the top of my head and say, "A clear mind starts with a calm morning." Those calm mornings ended the day he didn't wake up. I sat down at the table with my coffee, and the old wooden chair creaked under me, a sound that once annoyed me, but now felt like an old friend clearing its throat. My fingers wrapped around the warm mug as I let myself drift back through small moments I had pushed aside for years. My husband had always been steady, quiet, but present. He'd built our savings carefully, made sure everything we owned had both our names on it. He cared about protecting me even when we argued about little things, like whether we really needed to keep every receipt in a folder. He would laugh and say, "Someday you'll thank me for being so particular." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. Now, looking over the missing money, the missing deed, the questions around my own mailbox, I finally did. I remembered a specific night, almost a decade ago, when he came home from work holding a stack of papers. He placed them gently in front of me. "If anything happens to me," he said, "don't let anyone but you and the bank touch these accounts. Not even David unless you choose to involve him." I had laughed lightly, telling him he was being dramatic. He wasn't. He was preparing me for something I didn't recognize until now. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady me. After he passed, David had grown distant. Not intentionally, but life swept him up. I noticed how Victoria always stepped in when finances were mentioned. She'd answer questions meant for him, make jokes about how numbers confused him, and he'd just smile like it didn't matter. I remember one evening when David visited alone, months after the funeral. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the spring chill. He asked if I needed anything. Money, help paying bills, medical support. His voice was soft, almost pleading. I told him I was fine, that I didn't want to be a burden. He had looked relieved, but also guilty, as if he knew the truth even then, that he wanted to help, but someone else didn't want him to. The memory stung now, sharper than before. I traced a small crack in the tabletop with my fingertip. The wood had split during one of our winter storms years ago. My husband had promised he'd fix it, but never got the chance. I kept it unfixed, maybe because it reminded me that not everything broken had to be repaired right away. Some things just needed to be understood. My eyes drifted to the window, where frost clung to the glass in delicate patterns. I could see my faint reflection. Older, thinner, but still steady. Behind the lines of age was someone who had survived enough to know when a truth was being covered up. I thought again of David's voice asking about the lake house, so certain he had given me something beautiful. And I thought of Victoria's face, how it tightened, how she avoided looking at either of us. People reveal themselves in the smallest moments. I finished the last sip of coffee and stood, placing the mug in the sink. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a place holding stories, some painful, some comforting, all pushing me toward what I needed to see. My husband had tried to protect me. My son believed he had done right by me, and somewhere in between, someone else had rewritten the truth. As I walked into the living room, the weight of it settled fully. I wasn't just missing a house. I was missing years of support, trust, and clarity that should have been mine. And now that I had begun tracing the past, I knew I wouldn't stop until every missing piece found its place. That afternoon, the sky carried a muted shade of gray, the kind that settles quietly over a neighborhood and softens the edges of everything it touches. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside, needing the cold air to clear my thoughts. The wind brushed against my face, and for a moment, I let it ground me. I wasn't walking anywhere specific, just letting my feet take me down familiar streets. It wasn't until I reached the community park that I saw someone waving at me. A familiar figure bundled in a thick blue jacket. Loretta? It was Emma, a retired librarian who lived 3 houses down. She had always been kind in that gentle, unobtrusive way, never prying, but always noticing. I walked toward the bench where she sat, the wood chilled from the winter air. "Cold day to be out," I said softly. She smiled. "Cold makes people honest. No one pretends to enjoy it." I let out a small breath that wasn't quite a laugh. My thoughts were too heavy to lift. She studied my face for a moment, long enough to sense something was off, but kind enough not to force it. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Everything all right?" I hesitated. I wasn't ready to tell anyone the whole truth, but the weight of it was pressing too tightly against my chest. "I realized something recently," I said. "Something that changes a lot of things." Emma nodded, waiting. She had a patience that made silence feel safe. "It's about my son," I continued, "and someone close to him." Her expression softened with understanding before I even finished the sentence. She had raised 2 sons herself. She knew the complicated tangle that forms when new people enter a family. She folded her hands in her lap. "You know," she said, "people reveal who they are most clearly when they think no one is watching." I looked at her, surprised by how closely her words mirrored my own thoughts from the nights before. She glanced toward the playground, empty now except for the swings shifting lightly in the wind. "I've seen your daughter-in-law around," she added gently. "Always in a hurry, always checking your mailbox before you even step outside." My breath caught. "You noticed that too?" "Oh, many times," she said. "I figured she was helping you." Then she paused, her voice lowering. But the look on her face, it wasn't the look of someone helping. It was the look of someone guarding something. A quiet ripple moved through me, not shock this time, but confirmation. Those small moments, her lingering by the mailbox, her insistence on handling my paperwork, her sudden tension when David mentioned the lake house, they were no longer isolated fragments. They were pieces of a larger picture. Emma reached into her bag and handed me a folded envelope. "I found this by accident," she said. "It was stuck under the cluster of mailboxes last week. It has your name on it." My heart thudded as I unfolded it. Inside was a notice from a financial office dated months ago, confirming receipt of documents I never sent. My hands tightened on the paper. "If it's important," Emma said softly, "I thought you should have it." I nodded, unable to trust my voice for a moment. The cold air suddenly felt sharper, the sky heavier. "Thank you," I finally whispered. We sat in silence, packed, the kind that fills rather than empties. Emma didn't prod, didn't rush me. She simply gave me space to process the realization, settling deeper into my bones. Someone had been intercepting things meant for me. Someone had been moving pieces behind my back. And now, with this envelope in my hand, I had the first tangible proof. When I rose from the bench, the wind pushed lightly against me, as if urging me forward. I tucked the envelope safely inside my coat and walked home with steadier steps. The truth wasn't complete yet, but now I wasn't searching in the dark anymore. The walk home felt different this time. The envelope inside my coat seemed to warm and chill me at the same time, its weight pressing against my ribs like a reminder that the truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was in my hands now. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, the familiar creak greeting me as always, but nothing about the house felt familiar anymore. I set the envelope on the kitchen table beside the bank statements, each paper forming a small island of clarity. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me. The refrigerator hummed in the background, steady and uncaring, while the clock ticked with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Even the air felt still, as if the house itself was waiting for what I would do next. I unfolded the envelope again, this time studying every line. It confirmed that documents related to a property transfer had been submitted. Documents with my name misspelled just enough to pass unnoticed if someone wasn't paying attention. Someone had been counting on no one paying attention. I ran my thumb over the uneven signature. It wasn't mine. It mimicked the shape, but not the pressure, not the rhythm. My husband used to say you could tell a lie by the way a pen hesitated on paper. This signature hesitated in all the wrong places. I took a slow breath and opened my kitchen drawer, the one where I kept old folders from years ago. Inside were receipts, letters, tax notes, small fragments of a life built carefully over decades. I pulled out the folder labeled Household Records. It was worn at the edges from years of use, my husband's handwriting on the front still clear despite time softening the ink. I spread everything out across the table. Real documents, real signatures, real proof of a life built honestly. Side by side, the differences were undeniable. The afternoon light shifted across the table as the sun dipped lower, tracing long shadows across the documents. I watched those shadows stretch, reminding me of how long this deceit had been cast over my life. I remembered moments that once seemed harmless, Victoria answering questions for David, redirecting conversations, gently insisting that I shouldn't stress over financial details. But now I understood. Easing my burden was never the intention. Separating me from my own information was. I pushed the papers into a neat row, lining them up like steps in a path I could finally see. My husband's old advice echoed in my mind. When something feels wrong, don't ignore the details. They tell the truth first. I picked up the phone and called the financial office listed on the notice. A woman answered, cheerful and efficient. When I gave my name, there was a pause, too long to be routine. Yes, we have a file here, she said, though it appears another party handled the communication on your behalf. Another party, not my son. My fingers tightened around the phone. Can you tell me who that was? She hesitated, then read off the name. Not mine, not David's, but one I knew. I thanked her and hung up, the silence closing in the moment the call ended. I stared at the wall for a long time, letting the information settle like dust after a storm. So it was her. Not speculation. Not suspicion. A fact. I looked back at the documents spread across my table. None of this was a misunderstanding. None of it was an accident. Someone had intercepted my support, redirected my property, and manipulated my son's trust for years. And she did it quietly, counting on me being too old, too tired, too trusting to notice. I gathered the papers into a folder, smoothing the edges with care. The truth was no longer scattered. It was organized, grounded, real. I placed the folder gently in my bag and zipped it closed. For the first time in days, my breath felt steady. This wasn't just about a lake house anymore. It was about reclaiming what was taken, piece by piece, truth by truth. The next day, the cold settled deeper into the neighborhood, the kind that makes each breath a little sharper. I stepped outside with my bag over my shoulder, the folder inside it pressed flat against my side. I wasn't headed anywhere official yet. I just needed space to think before taking the next step. The sidewalk was dusted with thin lines of frost, and the bare branches above me rattled softly in the wind. As I passed the mailbox, I paused, letting my fingers rest lightly on the metal. It felt colder than usual, colder than the air around it. For years, I had trusted that this little box brought me what I needed. Now I knew it had also hidden what I deserved. I kept walking until I reached the corner cafe, a small place with fogged windows and the smell of roasted coffee drifting through the door. I ordered a cup and sat by the window, watching the morning unfold. People hurried by, with scarves pulled high and gloves shoved deep into pockets. Life going on, unaware of the truth unfolding in mine. I took out the folder and opened it, the papers spreading across the small table. Bank statements, the forged signature, the letter from the financial office. Each one a quiet witness. I traced the edges again, grounding myself in the clarity they brought. That was when the door chimed, and someone called my name. Loretta? I looked up to see Daniel, my husband's former coworker, holding a paper cup and wearing the same tired kindness he always had. I hadn't seen him in months, maybe longer. He pulled out a chair. Mind if I sit? I nodded, and he settled in, glancing at the documents before looking back at me with a thoughtful crease in his brow. You're sorting through old records? He asked gently. I hesitated before answering, trying to understand a few things. He tapped his fingers lightly against his cup, thinking, Your husband talked a lot about making sure you were taken care of. He was always protective when it came to financial matters. He paused. He mentioned working with someone to ensure everything was in your name. I felt the air still around us. Daniel continued, unaware of how precisely his words were stitching themselves into the truth I'd been assembling. After he got sick, he told me he didn't want anyone stepping between you and what he left behind. He was particular about that. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with a mixture of gratitude and confirmation. My husband had tried to shield me, even in his final days. He knew how vulnerable life could become when trust fell into the wrong hands. I closed the folder slowly. Things may not have gone how he intended. Daniel's eyes softened. If something's wrong, Loretta, you deserve to know early. Your husband would have wanted that. We sat quietly for a moment. Outside, the wind whipped through the street, carrying dried leaves across the pavement. I stared at the reflection of myself in the cafe window. Older, yes, but not helpless. Not blind. Daniel glanced at his watch and stood up. If you ever need help understanding the paperwork, you call me. I mean it. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. When he left, I turned back to the window. In the glass, I no longer saw a woman confused by missing answers. I saw someone putting the pieces together, steadily, silently, without rushing. On my way home, I noticed how quiet the neighborhood seemed. Houses sat still, windows dark, driveways empty. It struck me then how much had been happening right under the surface of this stillness, how much had been hidden in plain sight. I walked past Mrs. Dalton's house and noticed her peering out the window, her hand lifted in a small wave. I waved back, feeling a strange sense of connection to the people who unknowingly held pieces of the puzzle with me. When I reached my front door, I didn't hesitate. I set my bag on the table, pulled out the folder, and placed it where the morning light could touch every page. The truth wasn't just circling me anymore. It was lining up, forming a clear path, and for the first time in a long while, I felt steady enough to follow it. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, the kind of quiet that lets every thought land clearly. I set my bag on the dining table, the folder resting on top like a steady heartbeat. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at the stack of papers, each one a piece of something bigger, something that had been unfolding behind my back for far too long. I pulled out the chair and sat down. The wood felt cold beneath me, but it grounded me. I opened the folder again, spreading the pages across the table the same way I had earlier, but now they felt different. Not just evidence, but a map. The mistakes in the forged signature, the missing deposits, the misdirected mail, the financial office's notice, and now Daniel's words echoing quietly at the edge of everything. He didn't want anyone stepping between you and what he left behind. The picture was no longer blurry. It was forming a shape I could no longer deny. I picked up the forged document again, letting my eyes trace the way the pen dipped unnaturally in the middle of the signature, like someone trying too hard to imitate something they didn't fully understand. It wasn't clumsy. It was precise. Careful. Practiced. That was almost worse. I leaned back slightly, letting the light from the window fall across the paper. The shadows sharpened the lines, exposing the parts that never matched my handwriting. And suddenly, Memories I had tried to brush away came flooding back. Small, quiet moments that hadn't meant anything at the time, but now glowed with uncomfortable clarity. Victoria standing by my mailbox on a Wednesday morning, insisting she just happened to be in the neighborhood. Her nervous laugh when David mentioned the lake house during last year's call. The time she offered to help organize my old paperwork after the funeral, insisting she was only trying to make things easier for me. And the way she always positioned herself as the messenger between me and my son, as if communication needed to pass through her first. Piece by piece, the truth was slotting into place. Not loudly, not suddenly, but inevitably. I turned to another document, a notice about property tax adjustments, a notice I had never seen, a notice that had been received months ago, with my forged signature acknowledging it. I felt my breath steady, not quicken. This wasn't panic. It was understanding. Someone had built a maze around me and hoped I would stay lost in it. But they underestimated how long a mother can remember details, how long a widow holds on to the things her husband taught her, how silence sharpens the mind instead of dulling it. I closed the folder and pressed my palm flat against the cover. The weight of it felt honest, real, a foundation. There was no escaping the conclusion anymore. What was meant for me, support, security, a home, had been rerouted with intention. Not accident, not confusion, intention. I stood and walked to the window, watching the winter light stretch across the street. The neighborhood was still, deceptively peaceful. Yet beneath the surface, I now knew there were threads of truth and deception woven tightly together. But deception always leaves loose ends. And I had found more than one. As I turned back to the table, something settled inside me. Not anger, not heartbreak, but clarity. A calm, steady understanding of what had been done and what needed to come next. This wasn't just a story about missing money or a lost house anymore. It was about what happens when someone rewrites the truth and expects you never to read it. And now that I had started reading, I wasn't going to stop. The next morning arrived softly, the kind of winter light that barely touches the ground before fading again. I brewed a cup of tea instead of coffee this time, something warm but not restless. I carried it to the dining table, where the folder still waited, exactly where I'd left it. Nothing had shifted, nothing had disappeared. The truth was still there, quiet, patient, undeniable. I sat down and opened the folder, more out of instinct than necessity. I already knew what was inside. But sometimes, seeing the truth again steadies the mind. My husband used to say repetition was a kind of armor. Each time you face something, it loses just a little of its power to frighten you. I reached for the financial notice again, the one Emma had found under the mailboxes. The date printed on the top pulled me back into a memory I had almost forgotten. A phone call from an unfamiliar number. A message left on my machine. At the time, I dismissed it as a spam call. Now I wasn't so sure. I dialed the number printed on the notice. The line rang twice before someone picked up. "Thank you for calling. How can I help you today?" I stated my name, steady and clear. Another pause, another too long silence. Then the rustle of papers. "Yes, I remember this file," the representative finally said. "There was a woman who came in regarding your account. She said she was assisting you because of mobility issues." Mobility issues. The words pressed against my chest like something heavy. "I never authorized anyone," I replied quietly. "I understand," the representative said, "but she provided documentation claiming to act on your behalf." I closed my eyes, not to hide emotion, but to focus. "What documentation?" "There was a letter with your signature." A soft exhale, the same signature we now know is not yours. My hand tightened slightly around the phone. Not shaking, just holding on. "Do you still have a copy?" I asked. "We do. I can have it printed and ready for pickup." I thanked her and ended the call. The phone felt warm in my hand, warmer than the tea cooling beside me. I set it down and pressed my fingertips lightly against the table, letting the steady grain of the wood anchor me. Someone had forged not just paperwork, but access. Someone had gone into an office, looked a stranger in the eye, and pretended to be acting for my well-being. And they had done it with ease. I stood and walked to the living room, letting my eyes scan the quiet space. Nothing here had changed. The same framed photographs, the same worn rug, the same couch with a cushion that always slid to the side. But the story of my life, what I thought it was, had tilted. I remembered something else then, something small but suddenly sharp. Months ago, David mentioned a meeting with a legal assistant, something about verifying documents related to the house. He said it so casually, so warmly, as if he believed I had already handled it. Victoria had been standing beside him. She nodded along, smiling. Now, I could see the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she avoided my gaze. The lies hadn't started with the mailbox. They'd started long before that. I returned to the table and picked up the folder again. This time, I added a new sheet of paper, a blank one. I wrote down everything in order. The lake house I never received, the support payments that never arrived, the forged signature, the financial notice, the intercepted mail, the visit to the financial office by another party. When I finished writing, I looked at the list. Clean, simple, undeniable. Not emotions, not assumptions. Facts. The kettle on the stove clicked softly as it cooled. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows with a steady whisper. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't panicked. I was preparing. Truth has a way of gathering momentum once you give it room. And now it wasn't just gathering. It was aligning, forming a path I could follow without hesitation. The next step wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply this. I would pick up the forged document, I would gather the missing pieces, and soon, very soon, someone would have to explain how my life had been rewritten without my consent. The truth was no longer hiding. It was moving, and so was I. The winter light had already begun to fade when I left the house again, the folder tucked safely inside my bag. I walked slowly, not because of the cold, but because every step felt like it carried the weight of something long overdue. The wind pushed gently at my coat, as if reminding me that the world kept moving, even when the truth tried to hide itself. At the financial office, the lobby was warm and bright, the soft hum of printers filling the space. A receptionist recognized my name and excused herself to retrieve the copy of the document. While I waited, I studied the framed pictures on the wall, certificates, group photos, awards, all symbols of trust. Trust that someone had used to take what wasn't theirs. The receptionist returned with a manila folder. Here you are, ma'am. Let us know if you need anything else. I thanked her, then stepped out into the crisp air before opening it. The paper felt heavier than it should have, its corners crisp, its ink bold. At the bottom, in a handwriting that almost mimicked mine, was the signature. Shaky in the middle, too controlled at the end. A poor imitation wrapped in confidence. I held it beside a genuine document from my husband, remembering the way he used to sign his name, decisive, simple, honest. My own signature had always been lighter, a small curl at the end. The forged one had none of that. It was a performance, nothing more. I walked home quietly, the folder under my arm like a quiet truth following me through the neighborhood. Snow flurries drifted down in thin spirals, catching in the glow of the streetlights. The cold air cleared my mind, leaving only the facts behind. Inside the house, I set both documents on the table and looked at them side by side. The contrast was undeniable. My husband had spent years teaching me how to spot inconsistencies. In finances, in paperwork, in people. He used to say, the truth always shows up in the details. And the details were speaking clearly now. I sat down and pulled the list I'd made earlier from my bag. One by one, I added new points. The forged authorization letter. The consistent misspelling of my name. The timing, the months after my husband passed. The financial inquiries made without my knowledge. A pattern was emerging, one too precise to be accidental. Whoever had done this hadn't acted out of desperation. They acted with intention, opportunity, and confidence that no one would question them. I leaned back in my chair, letting my eyes wander the room. The picture of David on the mantel caught my attention. His graduation day, cap tilted, grinning. I remembered how proud I was, how he hugged me so tightly I almost lost my breath. That boy would have never let me struggle. That man believed he was helping me. Someone had used his trust to close a door between us. I picked up the forged document again, studying the lines of ink. I imagined the moment it was signed. Quiet room, confident hand, no hesitation. Someone standing in front of a stranger, pretending to act for me. Pretending to know my needs. Pretending to care about my security. Someone who had found comfort in controlling what belonged to me. I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into the folder. The edges clicked softly into place, as if acknowledging the path ahead. My husband's old letter was still in the drawer nearby. I opened it again, reading the words slowly. Protect what is yours. Don't let anyone speak for you unless you choose it. For years, I had believed choosing silence was the same as choosing peace. Now I understood. Silence had allowed someone else to speak in my place. I closed the drawer gently. The truth wasn't only clear, it was complete. My husband's intentions, my son's trust, my stolen support, the forged authorization, the intercepted mail, all of it pointed in one direction. And now that I had every piece, there was only one thing left to do. Not confront, not accuse, not yet. First, I would gather the final proof. Then, I would let the truth speak for itself, louder than anything I could say. The next morning, the sky hung low and pale, as if the daylight itself was unsure whether it wanted to stay. I moved through the house quietly, gathering every document I had laid out the night before. Each page felt like a thread, and together they formed a rope strong enough to pull the truth into the open. I slipped everything into the folder and fastened the clasp carefully, the sound crisp in the stillness. Before leaving the house, I stood for a moment near the window. Frost traced faint lines along the glass, patterns that looked almost deliberate. I watched a car pass down the street, its tires crunching softly over thin patches of snow. Life outside felt slow, gentle, so different from the storm unraveling quietly beneath the surface of mine. At the attorney's office, the receptionist directed me to a small waiting area. The chairs were firm, the walls lined with framed certificates. I held the folder on my lap, my fingers resting lightly on the edges. When the attorney emerged, a middle-aged man with a calm expression, he motioned for me to follow him into his office. I handed him the folder without ceremony. He opened it, scanning each document with steady concentration. Page after page, his brows knit a little tighter. When he finished, he closed the folder and leaned back slightly. "Mrs. Harper," he said carefully, "this is not a misunderstanding. This is deliberate misrepresentation, and whoever submitted these documents did so with confidence that you would never know." His words didn't sting. They simply confirmed what I had already understood. I nodded once. "I need to know exactly what was done, and how." He outlined the steps, retrieving full account histories, comparing signatures, pulling property transfer logs, checking any official correspondence that mentioned my name. He spoke methodically, each detail falling into place like a stone in a path I had already begun walking. I listened in silence, absorbing every word without flinching. The truth had stopped shocking me. It had become a companion, a steady presence, guiding me toward clarity. When I left the office, the air felt colder, sharper. My breath formed small clouds in front of me as I walked, but my steps were steady. At the corner, I saw a familiar figure approaching, Mrs. Dalton, wrapped tightly in her winter coat. She greeted me with a gentle nod. "You're out early," she said. "Just taking care of a few things," I replied. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I saw your daughter-in-law at your mailbox again last week. She looked uncomfortable when she realized I was watching." I felt no jolt of surprise, only confirmation settling deeper into the foundation beneath my feet. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. She patted my arm. "You're stronger than you look, Loretta. Don't let anyone decide your life for you." I continued home with her words lingering softly behind me. The street looked the same as always, quiet houses, bare trees, snow gathering in small corners, but I felt the subtle shift inside me. Not anger, not fear, something steadier. Resolve. Back inside the house, I placed the folder on the kitchen table again. This time, it wasn't a collection of scattered truths. It was a plan, a path, a choice. I sat down, letting the weight of everything settle without crushing me. My husband's letter lay in the drawer, his voice still steady even through faded ink. I rested my hand over the drawer for a moment, drawing strength from the memory of him. Someone had taken advantage of my silence, my trust, my grief. But they had mistaken quiet for weakness. I straightened the papers one last time, aligning the edges with slow, deliberate care. I wasn't preparing for confrontation. I was preparing for clarity. And clarity, when it arrives, does not need to raise its voice. The day I chose to speak with David, the winter sun sat low behind a veil of thin clouds, giving the afternoon a muted silver glow. I didn't rush. I brewed tea, set out 2 cups, and laid the folder on the table, not open, not displayed, just present. Its quiet weight filled the room more than raised voices ever could. When David arrived, he brushed the snow from his shoulders and stepped inside with the easy smile he'd always had. But when he saw my face, calm, steady, prepared, his smile softened into concern. "Mom, everything okay?" I gestured for him to sit. He did, glancing at the folder, then back at me. "What's going on?" I folded my hands around my mug, letting the warmth steady me. "I need to clear up something important." He leaned forward slightly. "Is it about the lake house?" I nodded, and more than that. I slid the folder toward him, slow and deliberate. He opened it, expecting confusion he could explain away. But the farther he read, the more his posture changed. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened, his breath slowed. He lifted the page with the forged authorization letter, staring at the signature meant to be mine. "Mom, you didn't sign this." It wasn't a question. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." He swallowed hard, the kind of swallow someone makes when the truth cuts deeper than they expected. He kept reading. Bank statements with missing deposits, notices I never received, the mismatched signatures, the financial office's confirmation that someone else acted in my name. With each page, something inside him unraveled. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from realization. Who did this? His voice cracked in the middle. I didn't need to answer. I saw the moment he understood. It landed in his eyes first, shock, then disbelief, then something heavier, something like grief. He set the papers down with a soft thud. "All this time, I thought you were okay. I thought she told me you didn't want help, that you preferred handling everything alone." I looked at him gently. "I know you believed her." He pressed a hand against his forehead. "Mom, she said she forwarded the checks. She said the house paperwork went through. She said..." His voice broke. "I trusted her." I reached across the table and touched his hand, the same hand I held when he learned to walk, when he scraped his knee, when he left for college. "You trusted the person you built a life with. There's no shame in that." His eyes brimmed, not with tears, but with the sting of betrayal only the closest people can deliver. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly behind us, steady and patient. Finally, he whispered, "I should have seen it." "No," I said. "You weren't meant to. People hide things best from the ones they stand closest to." He took a slow breath, then another, grounding himself the way he used to before big decisions. When he finally looked at me, his expression had changed. The shock had settled. The truth had settled. What remained was clarity. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want everything corrected," I said. "Not punished, not destroyed, just corrected." He nodded, the kind of nod that comes from understanding rather than agreement. "I'll take care of it. Every step." He gathered the folder carefully, treating it like something fragile. But before he rose, he looked at me, really looked at me, with a mixture of regret and resolve. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I squeezed his hand once more. "You didn't fail me. The truth just found its way home." When he left, the house grew quiet again, but not the heavy quiet of uncertainty. It was a gentler quiet, a settled quiet, the kind that follows after something long hidden finally comes to light. I stood by the window as he drove away, watching the tire tracks curve along the soft layer of snow, a small path carved into a winter morning. Outside, the world looked the same, but inside, something had shifted back into place, not loudly, not suddenly, just fully. The truth had come home, and with it, so had my peace.